So welcome everyone. My name is Pablo and I work for Thoughtbot. And today I wanted to talk about some things that I glossed a bit too quickly over the last time I gave a talk and may have been slightly misleading. I probably should have completed a bit better at the time, but that gives me an opportunity to come and talk to you now instead. And by the way, don't worry, you don't need to have seen the previous talk. I'm going to give you more exposition than a movie adaptation of a Dan Brown novel. Anyway, so to recap, last time I was talking about using Ember with Ember Data, and particularly using the store, because Ember does have a minimal implementation of the store provided that you can use when you're not using Ember Data. So just to lay out the ground a bit, imagine that you have a route such as this one, so it goes to /users, / and a parameter, right? So you will normally use it something like that. And you'll have a template like this one, where you just, well, I'm just rendering the simplest thing I can think of with that model. And the thing is that with just that, Ember already can fetch the model for us, because when we do not provide a route module, Ember provides a default implementation of the route module for us and a default implementation of the model hook. So the way it works is that Ember sees that, well, there is a path parameter called something something underscore ID. And then it says, well, if it is something something underscore ID, then the model is called ID. And it provides a route module that looks pretty much like this one, right? It has figured out all it needs to know, so it will do this.store.find user, and it will use the parameter that there was in the URL template and the path template to get that model. One thing that is worth stopping and mentioning now is that this default implementation is using .find. It is not using find record, which is what we are used to do with Ember Data. And the difference between the two is, well, first things first, when you do .find with Ember Data, behind the scenes, Ember Data simply converts that into a find record, because find is not really an Ember Data API, but it is rather a convention, a protocol that Ember leaves there for any data layer to implement, so that this default route module can work without any further instructions. Ember Data implements that. It just implements that as a call to find record. Orbit, I have never used Orbit, but it will probably do something like that. It will implement .find in some way, and it will work automatically. And if you want to implement your own data layer, then if you provide a store with a method find, it will automatically work in this way. So anyway, back to where we were. We have this. And as I was saying, we are not using Ember Data here. So the question is, how does this work? Well, it works because Ember already provides a default store, and it is such that we can provide a module such as this one. And this is just a simple Pollo, a plain old JavaScript object. We have put it in models /user.js, and during the build process, Ember looks at what we have in the models directory and takes all those modules and registers them in the container as models, each one with the name of the file. And this default implementation of the store is able to find a model with name store and use this. And this will work. You don't need to do anything special to make this work. You remove Ember Data, you have a route and a template like the one I have described, and You stick that in there, and that works. So you are also happy saying, OK, I don't need Ember Data. I can implement my own data layer. Then I can do simple AJAX requests because I don't need any of these JSON API stuff, which I particularly like, but not everybody does. And I can go and do something like this. And that works. You use the fetch API, and it returns a promise, or this returns whatever is on the endpoint, and that works pretty well. And then you go on working a bit more like that, and the first problem you may find is that this doesn't work with Ember CLI Mirage. And that is because Ember CLI Mirage mocks XML HTTP request, the classic way of doing AJAX, but it doesn't mock the fetch API. Oh, well, no problem. Let's do this with XML HTTP request. This is a bit more verbose, but it works with Ember CLI Mirage. It works with your normal API. And, well, you can just abstract this away, and you don't need to have all that noise in your model at the end of the day. Or you can use a polyfill for fetch that uses an XML HTTP request or something like that, and you don't need to see all the ugliness in your code. But then comes the actual problem of doing things like this, and it is that you cannot inject services into this. You cannot use computed properties, because this object, this pollo, this simple object that we're just creating there and exporting, is not aware of Ember, doesn't have access to the Ember dependency injection framework. So there's no way to, for example, use the AJAX service, which will be a common one to do that, or as I said, to use there, or as I said, to use computed properties. And why is that? That is something that, when I first found out, confused me a bit. And I was trying several things. I was trying to, for example, instead of returning a simple object, importing Ember object and returning an Ember object that extends into that, and that didn't work either. And I was trying a few things until I just ended up going to Ember's code base and seeing what this default implementation of the store was doing. And I'm going to show that to you now. First, just to remember where we were, that is the code that is using the store. This is store.find, name of the model, and an ID we can retrieve by. Okay, so if you go to Ember's code base, if you go to slash something slash routing slash route.js, what you find is this, and I am hiding away some stuff there so that we can uncover it step by step and not just see a wall of code and be all confused. Let's try to see what is here. So first, this route module that we all extend from when we create our own route modules has a computed property called store. Okay, so that is this .store. And it returns a pollo. It returns a plain old JavaScript object that implements find. Okay, so that is this .store.find. We got that far. Now, in order to find the user model, it needs to look into Ember's dependency injection container. And true enough, it gets hold of the owner, the application, which is good enough to look into the container. It uses factory4 with the name of the model. So it looks for a model with the name that we have passed in. And if this model doesn't exist, we just bail out, because, well, that's clearly not what the client code was intending to do. The next thing I'm going to unveil is it uses .find on the model it got through the dependency injection container, and we're done. Yeah, this works. Except, of course, I'm leaving out a line there. I actually don't know why that is there. I mean, now I have a certain idea, but I don't have a deep understanding. But what ends up being the end result of that is that when we do this dot class and substitute the model class that we were so happily about to use, the dependency injection container goes out of the window, and we don't have access to it anymore. We just have access to the plain raw object that we were using, well, that we were exporting. I actually went to Slack and then Discord, and then discussed the forum to ask about this. The first answer I got was this one. If Robert Jackson says that it is horrid and doesn't want to provide much more detail, then probably shouldn't be asking much more. I still asked a bit more. And Ryan Toronto, just last week actually, was able to provide a bit more context. All this has to do with back compatibility, with apps that nowadays may still be using old versions of Ember Data that used to do things differently and were different assumptions applied. And who knows, maybe there are still apps out there using Ember 3 point, where are we at the moment, 3.4, and still using Ember Data 1 point something. I can only pity their souls, but at the end of the day, that is the reason, is back compatibility. But well, I didn't stop at that. I thought, well, how can I make this work anyway? And I found two solutions that I'm bringing you. The first one, because we can have a little fun here, is the unorthodox solution. Please do not do this at home. And it is, how about we create an initializer? Instance initializers receive the application, which has access to the container. So we check it into the window global, with scare underscores, just so everybody knows, A, we shouldn't be touching this, and B, if we touch that, we're not responsible of anything. And then in our model, we access this this global that we have left there, and true enough, we can access the container. We can look up, for example, in this case, the AJAX service, and use it to make our AJAX request. And this works with Ember CLI Mirage, and we have access to services through this terrible, terrible hack, but it works. Of course, there's a saner solution, and to get there, you just have to think, Ember Data is doing this, so clearly there is a rational way of doing this. So I just had a look at what Ember Data was doing behind the scenes, and it's pretty much the following. It has another instance initializer, and what it does there is that it provides another service, the store that we know from Ember Data, and it injects it as store into any route, which we can do with that. And then we can just provide our own store that does something a bit more rational. From there, we can then use dependency injection or whatever we want to have access to models on app /models/ whatever, or we can do whatever we want. Maybe for our needs this is enough. Maybe we want to do something more complicated. But at least this will be now within Ember's dependency injection framework. We will have access to all its goodies. We will have access to services. We can do computer properties, and we can do all that crazy stuff. Also, I am hoping that I'm not leaving out anything this time, and I have to come and apologize for that again. By the way, the whole reason why I'm giving this talk is that I just left it at the pollo the last time, and it didn't come back to say, we have this problem with dependency injection. And in fact, I remember there was actually a question about that. And I just said, yes, of course, you can do this. And that would have been a good moment for me to stop and say, caveat. Well, that's the caveat, and that's the way to resolve it. And with that, I can only thank you for being my audience and ask if you have any questions.
Have you tried this in production?
Of course not. The solution with the plain pollo, I wouldn't even try. The solution, of course, with the global variable, I wouldn't even try. The store solution, that properly injects things, I'm confident that there's no problem with that. I will try that in production. But I have to admit that I haven't done it. Yeah, in fact, yeah, when I haven't used Ember Data in production, I have ended up creating my own service that injected the Ajax service elsewhere. And at the end of the day, it's the same thing. It's just that you don't have access to this. You don't get the benefit of this default implementation of routes that Ember gives you. So the only difference between doing your own thing and doing this is that with this you get that extra goodie from Ember.